By the way, my name is Sutterer, not Stutterer. Yeah, where's my beer, actually? So, I got extremely... Can I walk, by the way? I don't want to stand there. I have extremely good news. I'm probably not going to leave Taiwan at all. Because it's not only the beautiful, nice people here and not the extremely well brewed and high quality beers from Taiwan. It's also the fact that I can find 2 of my favorite German beers in a random supermarket in Taiwan. So, and I've been living in Australia for like 1.5 years now, and they only import the shit from Germany, and like you guys have all that awesome stuff. And also what impresses me is that the fact that you not only take this load of work to import the beer from Germany to Taiwan, also the fact that you guys take this effort to return the empty containers to Germany, because it's a German law to return empty containers to the provider. Okay, let's talk about Trailblazer. Hey, hello. So I want to talk about Rails first, because Trailblazer is a thin layer on top of Rails. So Rails is pretty proud of its monolithic MVC architecture. I would do MVC, but I don't have my hands to do the quotes. So what Rails is kind of famous for is it has a really simple monolithic architectural setup. So stuff for the UI goes into the view, persistence logic goes into the model, and everything else goes into the model or the controller, or only into the model, because skinny controller, fat model, and all that stuff. So the problem that I have seen in Rails in the last 10 years is that it usually ends up like this, or even like this, like an application simply using 3 abstraction layers for complex, really complex applications and domain logic. And the problem is, once you start suggesting additional abstraction layers, you are considered too enterprise, too, I don't know, over-abstracting. Everyone is like, oh my god, a new class, oh, this can't be right, like this is not MVC, this is something else. Martin Fowler, what is that? So, and it makes me sad a little bit. So Trailblazer actively brings those new abstraction layers into Rails, and this is to help you out of your misery in complex, weird Rails applications with lots of dependencies into a beautiful architecture which makes you happy, which makes you go home and think of your awesome component you built today, and this component is never going to break again. It doesn't matter what else you change in your application. So Trailblazer is not to overcomplicate your life. Trailblazer is to make people happy. And a friend of mine gave a talk in, I don't know even where this is, I saw the tweet, and it's pretty funny because like you can see him standing there, and like the slide says, Rails is so 2005. And yeah, that's my friend, my ABC, and I think he's quoting someone else because, I don't know, like maybe it's his opinion. So what I think about this is that the innovation level in Rails in 2005 was amazing. Like we got all these new concepts like, I don't know, test-driven development, and I'm not going to talk about test-driven today. And I don't know, like generators and a view model, a model layer that abstracts the database. And the problem I see in the last 10 years is that the innovation level on the architectural tier in Rails has decreased because nothing has really changed on the architectural level. We still have M, V, and C to put our code. And when I say Rails, I don't mean Active Record, because I think Active Record is still awesome, and the way they maintain it is the way they should maintain. Bless you. They should maintain all the other parts of Rails, but unfortunately, Rails is not only Active Record, and so I'm a bit disappointed, desperate, depressed about the lack of innovation in Rails. But so a couple of cool things that were introduced in Rails in the last years was like the way templates are found, lookup context. I'm not saying that action view is great. I'm saying lookup context, one small component in Rails in ActionView is great, or active job was recently introduced, so that helps you to decouple your background jobs from the actual implementation of the background engine. Then active model, the concept as it is a great idea to have an interface defined between objects and the persistence layer or the rendering layer, but then there's the rainy days. Okay, no comment. And then stuff like nested attributes where like to fix something else, to press all the logic into a model to make forms work, like nested forms. And then they were like, oh man, I can only have one form for one model, so let's introduce validation contexts to fix that. And then they added strong parameters to fix the validation context to fix the nested attributes. So it's all like, they introduce small features, but they only fix something that is wrong per design, in my opinion. And this is the lack of abstraction layers. This is the M, V, and C that should be sufficient, and they say this is sufficient for an application architecture, but luckily we got Trailblazer now. Yo, thank you, you've been a great audience. Okay, so Trailblazer actively brings new abstraction layers, new classes, new concepts into the Rails architecture. And I'm not going to go into detail with all those layers, but I'm going to speak about operation and how form objects work with operations, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the view layer and cells in this talk. And the first thing that I love about Trailblazer is that we changed the file structure, so it's not anymore app controller, app view, it's like app concepts, and then your actual component you're working on. In this talk, I'll talk about comments, so it's the comment component or the concept, and then all the assets and classes reside in that directory. And another goal of Trailblazer is to have logic-less models. So your model is only persistent. So model classes ideally end up with associations only. And you're not using models directly anymore. You always work on the persistence layer with via an operation, which we're going to discuss in detail now. To discuss operations, I want to talk about high-level domains. I don't know why I took this picture. It just doesn't have anything to do. So high-level domains, every application has a high-level domain. So in my example, in this application, I want to talk about coffee, like a coffee shop rating application or something, so you can search for coffee shops. This is a very inviting Starbucks in the Philippines, by the way. So you can search for a coffee shop, you can view a coffee shop details, you can add comments to a coffee shop, or you can edit your profile and follow a shop to get notifications. So usually, this is what we talk about when we talk about an application. You don't talk about implementation details like, hey, and then this, I don't know, this comment gets saved in MongoDB. You say like, hey, my application allows you to add a comment to a coffee shop. So usually the user uses this high-level domain without even knowing it. So they search a coffee shop, they view the coffee shop, then they click on the shop and add a comment, and then they might click the link to follow a shop. So a user uses your high-level domain just like a machine would use your API, because the high-level domain is kind of your API, because it's the public entry points to change application state. And so what's important about these high-level domains, high-level domain entry points, is that this defines your application. Like when you explain your application to your mom, you don't talk about the implementation. You talk about the high-level concepts. And what I wanted in Trailblazer on Rails is to have those high-level endpoints in separate, I don't know, classes, files, whatever. Like, because I just wanted to have, I want to map my domain to objects. That's object orientation. But the implementation, the implementation for that should be usable for my user interface. The implementation should also be usable to handle the API, to act as an API endpoint. And what I also wanted is to have this operation, this concept, as usable in my tests. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. And in Rails, we have this concept partially. So usually a little bit of your domain logic, of your high-level domain logic, sits in the controller, and then a lot of logic sits in the model. And then you have in your tests, you don't use code from the model in the controller. You use like factories to set up. But basically, you're doing the same in a test when you set up a test. But there you have factories. And then some people also use service objects, and then it's like a weird mix of technology and gems and stuff just to achieve a clean interface for your application. So I want to have a class that allows me to implement one of my application steps and use it in different backends. And this is what we call operation in Trailblazer. So the implementation details at this moment don't matter. It's a class, and it gives me exactly what I want. So using this kind of operation, create comment, follow coffee shop or whatever, using an operation is very simple. You just define the operation class name and pass in the parameters this operation needs to perform. So this is in a controller. But I can also use the same endpoint in a console. Like it will do the exact same logic that happens in a controller. And I can also use this as a test factory. So this is a really a great achievement in our production systems, that we have tests that are one-to-one mapped to the real life, because we can set up test environments using operations, and they will do the exact same as happens with the controller. And a really nice feature in operations is they can also work with other formats. So the incoming parameters don't have to be a hash. They can be JSON, they can be XML, and so on. And no, an operation is not the same as just calling, so in this example, calling create on the model. Because the problem in Active Record is, or with Active Record's high-level API, is that every different step, creating, deleting, updating, and so on, is in one class. And then you have callbacks to configure the default behavior. Then you have validations and all that stuff. But sometimes you don't need a validation for update, but you need a validation for create and all this stuff. So it might look as if it has the same semantic as Active Records creators and all, and creative update attribute, but it's not the same. All right, so we got this operation concept. This operation concept allows us to change application state with a well-defined interface, and is usable in different environments. It's pretty awesome. So what you usually start when you set up a high-level domain in Trailblazer is you put all your public API steps into operations, so like shop create, comment create, shop show, shop follow. So we use a lot of namespacing in Trailblazer, because it doesn't make sense to push everything into one class, and then you have like weird method names like create profile in comment or whatever. So we use namespacing, and operations go into the top level namespace of a concept. The concept in this example is either a shop or a comment. And to run this operation, I use the square brackets and pass in the parameters. So this will return the operation instance. And it doesn't matter what happens at the inside. This is how I trigger my application logic. And I can also run this operation with a block. And the block is only run when the validation, when the operation is valid. I'm going to talk about this validation concept in a second. And you can also pass an operation to a responder, because an operation can look like an active model, and so you can just chuck the operation into a responder, and it will render the appropriate view or give the appropriate error message or whatever. So you got the operation. It can be used in different backends, and we got this weird concept of how does the operation know that it's valid or it's not valid. So I would like to look at this operation code. Are you ready for some real code, not those snippets? Are you ready for some code? All right. Again, see ya. Okay, so this is an operation in Trailblazer, and it looks dramatic and lots of code. But hey, guys, it's just a class. So the basic concept is you create an operation for every high-level step in this case create, and you derive it from Trailblazer operation. And every operation has a process method. That's the only public method in this class. And this process method receives the parameters from the actual application. And what happens in an operation automatically is that it finds the appropriate model under special circumstances. You can turn this behavior off, so this is why I have this commanded, but just for your understanding, the model is automatically found in an operation. And then we have this validate do and then a block. So this is where you can put in logic when the validation of the operation is true. So I trigger an operation, the operation finds out if it's valid or not, and if it's valid, it runs this block. And in this block, I save the model because it's valid, and I send out notifications. So there's some things going on in the background. It doesn't matter here how the model gets updated or what a notification is. The fact is that the operation gives you a really, really simple way to distinguish between is my step valid or is it invalid. And so the way the operation finds out if it's valid or not is by using a form object. So every operation per default has a form object. And the form object defines properties of the incoming parameters or of the operation itself, and then defines validations. And so what basically happens is you call process on this operation, and then the contract or the form object is instantiated. And if it's invalid, this is teardrops because the validation is false. If it's invalid, the validate block is not executed. If it's valid, the block is executed. This is a really simple way to distinguish what to do in an API. And in Rails, this kind of logic is usually sitting in controller and model, and you have if and else in the controller, and then you have if and else in the model, and it's really hard to have this logic encapsulated. And in Reform, this is really cleanly layered with an operation, a form object, and then the model underneath. The funny thing is you can use operations for 75% of your logic because you always have this problem like, hey, do something, validate it, and then save it. So the default operation covers about 75% of all application requirements. That's 75, it's just, I made it up. It could also be 78 or 91. Oh, Richard, speaking of 91. He ordered me to make him a sleeveless shirt. Here we go. Some applause for Mr. Sleeveless. Oh yeah, two people clapping. So, hey, it's your shirt, you gave it to me. So the thing about operations is you're not limited to this validate block. You don't have to use it. You can also just use your own logic in the process method. So in this case, I use a active record directly. So I can use active record in an operation. I just cannot use active record outside of an operation, or I should not use. You can do whatever you want in Trailblazer. It's hippie style, do what you want. The thing is, we define a form object in every operation. And Reform also allows you to, I'll come to this in a second, Reform also allows you to render form objects. And so an operation makes it really easy to render the form object. So you can just grab the operation and then call .contract. That gives you the form object that you can use in a view. I'm going to speak about this in exactly 37 seconds. What's also cool about operations is they are stateless from the outside because the only public method is process. So it's really easy to send stuff to the background just by adding a worker module to the operation. You can run the operation and it's going to be run in the background. And that's pretty awesome because you don't have to think about how to push logic into a sidekick job, because I had problems in active record or when I put my code into models. It's always a bit of a pain in the ass to get this logic run in the background without running any other validations or callbacks. So operations make it really simple. And oh, sorry. And so I end up with quite a lot of operations in my application, but they are usually pretty brief classes, and they make it extremely simple to extend the default behavior without any if and else, because one operation is one use case. Let's talk briefly about this form object that is validating the input for an operation. It's the reform gem. So reform makes it really easy to write to use forms in Rails. So Rails gives you an amazing, high-quality, sophisticated approach for form objects. Like this, we had this Azure accessible to configure what parameters are allowed in forms. That's gone now. Then we have accept nested attributes for. I'm pretty sure every one of you had problems with that. Hey, this is not funny. And then we have validations in the model, and they always have like if-else, because validations sometimes can be used for create, but they shouldn't be used for update. And so validations always end up with like weird if, unless, blah, blah, blah. And then also callbacks, they do stuff before the validation, but only if this happens, and it's like extremely hard to go through to a legacy Rails app, and that's my job. And figuring out what's happening, whereas in an operation you just see, okay, this is the code to create something. And the weirdest thing is strong parameters. So strong parameters allows you to define which parameters should go into the update or create or whatever, and which don't. So it's like a hardcore wiring between controller and model. So the controller knows about the model doesn't know about the controller. It's like a really I don't like this setup. But like strong parameters for me is wrong, and I'll tell you why. So a form object usually just is a class, and it lets you define properties, fields of the form, like body, and then it lets you add validations for every property. You can use all the validations from active model, everything you want. And it also lets you define nested properties. So this is, for example, pretty cool to map this to a one-to-one, to a belongs to relationship. So you can have nested forms, nested validations, very simple. And the thing is, we don't need strong parameters, because if we pass in a hash with evil input, like I do here, it's really, really dangerous to pass in 0x1337, 0x1337, because it will break your code. The form object will simply ignore that, because the form object knows which properties belong to the form, so we don't need strong parameters. It's just because we are explicit and Rails is implicit. Rails always assumes everything automatically, and in Trailblazer, you say what you want, you say what you have. Say what you want, you say what you have. This is the rap I was promised you. And testing form object is a piece of cake, because you just set up your test objects, you instantiate the form, pass in the model you want to represent in the form, and then you call validate, which is one of the few public methods. Akira is sleeping. And then the validate method will return true or false, and then Reform gives you some more methods to deal with the model. I'm not going into detail. You can read the beautiful README, which is always not up to date. And Reform also gets minor version bumps, but the API completely changes. Hey, great. So Reform gives you a really simple API. So if I pass, if I have an invalid form, if I call validate with invalid data, the validate method returns false, and I can ask the form, hey form, what's your errors? And then it will return errors. It's a little bit similar to active model, but the API is way more strict, because the API in a form object is new to create the form, then validate to pass in the data, and validate the data without writing to the model. And then you can ask the form for the errors if there was a validation error, and you can assign the form to save the data, which means it pushes the data to the model. But before that, the model is not touched. I have a beautiful slide for that in a second. A form can also be rendered. So I set up the form, and then I can use it with simple form or form for helpers in Rails. Pretty easy. And there's a shortcut. If you have an operation, you just call operation.contract. You get the form object, you render it. Happy days. And so in Rails, the form is always in the model. In Trailblazer, it's a separate layer, sitting between model and controller. And the form, you can also have multiple forms for one model, which is impossible in Rails. And you can also have one form for multiple models. And this is really easy, because you just pass in multiple objects into the constructor, like comment and topic, and then you can assign the form to deal with multiple objects. So it builds a composition object automatically for you, which is really handy. That was actually the reason I wrote Reform in the first place 2 years ago, back in the days when I was young and fresh and, God. Forms can also do JSON and XML and all that stuff, because forms are based on representable. So instead of calling form validate with a hash, I can also say form validate with a JSON string or with an XML string, and it'll do the same. So you can use your form objects for your APIs for free. Really? And this is because forms, again, explicit, you define your properties, and by defining your properties in your nesting, Reform knows how to deal with XML or how to deal with JSON. And this is because Reform internally uses representable. I wanted to talk about representable, but suddenly it turned out this talk is not 45 minutes, but 30 minutes. So if you want to learn about the way we use representable in Reform, don't try to read the source, because it's horrible. I mean, it's not horrible, but it needs some refactoring. We all know how this works. So, Reform. Hey, I'm not saying Reform is, the implementation is great. It's just a little bit hard to follow because we use representable, and I want to change something in representable to make it easier to read Reform. Okay? Good. So, Reform comes with a constructor new. This will create a form and wrap the model. Then it will take care of deserializing the incoming parameters, whether it's JSON, hash, or whatever, and it will populate the model with additional objects. It depends on how you nest. So forms can also populate according to the incoming data. And then in the validate, when you actually validate the incoming data, the form doesn't not write to the model. The form validates its internal state. So this is a big advantage compared to Rails. And finally, when you save, the form pushes the data to the model. So the model is not touched until save or sync. This is my favorite slide I've ever done in the world. Okay, this was a form. This was planned to be a little bit less visible, so it's just a hint for me, but now we're going to talk about cells. You often have this problem that you have fragments, blocks in your page you want to implement. So in this example, it's like a comment. Again, coffee shop, you know, commenting coffee shops. So usually you use a helper, render comment, pass in the comment. This is when you Google for helper. Google image search gives you this image. I don't know why. So the helper, usually a helper receives the comment object or whatever, then you render the partial, then you pass in some locals, and then you have some additional logic because you want to do some fancy stuff. If the author is active, put in a link or not. And then you have to pass in more locals, and then you might have the idea to have different partials, so you add in more arguments, and then your helper ends up like this. And this is not really beautiful. This is sad, to be honest, because it's a helper. It's just a function. It's not even a method. And then the view can be okay. So this view is kind of okay to render my comment, but then you start adding like conditionals and stuff. So it ends up in an ugly script like PHP thing again. So here's the solution: cells. Hey, palm trees. So a cell works from the outside, looks like a helper. Instead of using render comment, I use cell. Cell will just instantiate and render the comment cell, which I'm going to show you. So as you can see, I pass in the comment object. And a cell is just a class derived from view model, has one default method, show. The show method calls render. When I call render, this will render the app, the cell's show view, which is in app concepts comment view. So this is not in the global directory. And so I want to render, so this was just an example, like I want to render hello Taiwan, but actually I want to render the comment box. This is MVC, by the way. This is not this MVC, but this MVC. So I can really simple test a cell because it's a class I can instantiate, and so I can write cell tests pretty simple without having to know anything about my environment. So let's talk a little bit about the view. In order to use views in a cell, you just use Haml or whatever you want, and I'll put this view over here. So this is the view I want to have in my cell. So as you can see, I use body and I use avatar, like kind of helper calls. But these helper calls, when you call a method in a cell view, you call the method on the cell instance itself. So there's no copying between view and class. So I define a body method. I return the comments body, available via model, and I define an avatar method and render the image tag. So you can use helpers, image tag, and all that stuff, form for whatever you want in the cell class and in the cell view. They still work. And so defining readers is pretty simple. So I don't want to write body the body method is a bit redundant, so you can just use property body that will create a reader for the model for you. You can do the same with image. So I end up with this beautiful small class and this beautiful view, which is logicless, and my class is totally straightforward and encapsulates this comment box. I don't know if you like this better or if you like this better. I think this looks better. Cells has several more features. I didn't know if I have enough time to talk about it. I actually don't have enough time. This is why I didn't work on this slide. So Rails Cells 4.0 is about to be released. It's without action view. We chucked out action view because we did it ourselves in 30 lines of code, 300% faster. Just saying. Rails core team is probably interested in using this stack in Rails 5.0, but I doubt it. Then we simplify a lot of stuff. We have lots of new cool concepts like caching fragments or view inheritance, all the cool stuff that Rails will not have in the next 10 years because action view is not evolving in any way. I'm a little bit frustrated about action view. So Trailblazer makes it really simple to model your high-level domain in operations. Yeah? It comes with a bunch of cool, mature gems like cells or reform or all that stuff. So it allows you to use, so it doesn't impose technical implementations on you. You can pick if you want to use view models, you can pick if you want to use form objects. Trailblazer makes it totally open for you. It gives you abstraction layers instead of pushing everything into the model. Again, you can use the abstraction layers the way you want. You don't have to do all of that stuff. And it's there to help you, not to make your life more complicated. I'm really good at making pancakes, banana pancakes. That stuff I was talking about is on GitHub. And thank you very much. You've been an awesome audience.